On a forgotten hilltop in Kiriath Jearim, a golden chest sat gathering dust inside an ordinary farmhouse, hidden from public eyes for 20 long years. Israel had grown so used to its absence that most people alive had never actually seen the object their ancestors once feared and revered above all else. David, freshly crowned king over a unified Israel, had just captured Jerusalem and wanted his new capital to hold something greater than palaces and walls. He wanted the Ark of the Covenant itself, the throne of an invisible God, placed at the very center of his kingdom's beating heart. So he assembled 30,000 of Israel's finest men, not for battle this time, but for the grandest religious procession the nation had ever staged. They marched toward the house of a man named Abinadab, where two of his sons, Uzzah and Ahio, had lived their entire lives beside the sacred chest. For these brothers, the ark was not a mystery wrapped in thunder and lightning. It was furniture, something dusted, moved and handled since childhood without incident. That lifelong familiarity quietly planted a dangerous confidence in Uzzah, a belief that he understood the ark's boundaries better than the law God had given Moses. The law was explicit. No one was to touch the ark directly. Levites alone were to carry it on their shoulders, using wooden poles slid through golden rings. Yet nobody in Abinadab's household thought of poles or priestly carriers. Instead, they built a brand new cart, pulled by oxen, a practical human shortcut. David, swept up in the excitement of the day, never questioned the method, perhaps recalling that Philistines once moved the ark by cart without disaster. That Philistine precedent, however, ignored something crucial. The Philistines never knew Israel's law, while the people of God knew it and had simply forgotten. The ark was carefully strapped onto the new cart, and Uzzah walked alongside it while his brother Ahio walked ahead, guiding the animals forward. The procession set off in a wave of celebration, common people singing improvised psalms, children racing beside the oxen, women shaking tambourines under the morning sun. David himself danced at the front, dressed in a simple linen ephod, forgetting his crown entirely, swept completely into the joy of this historic day. Musicians played harps, lyres, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals, a joyful roar echoing across the valleys, announcing to every village that the ark was finally coming home. Mile after mile, the caravan advanced without incident, and everyone's confidence grew, as though God himself was smiling silently on the entire celebration. They reached the threshing floor of Nacon, a place where the ground turned rough and uneven, scarred by generations of grain being separated from husk. The oxen, strong but clumsy animals, felt the uneven earth beneath their hooves, and one of them suddenly stumbled, jerking the heavy cart violently sideways. The ark tilted dangerously, and for one breathless moment it seemed certain to crash into the dust in front of everyone walking nearby. Uzzah, walking right beside it, reacted on pure human instinct, reaching out his hand to steady the ark before it could hit the ground. It was an almost automatic gesture, the same motion he had made countless times back home, never once thinking about the holiness of what he touched. His hand made contact with the golden surface of the ark, and in that exact instant, something invisible and absolute passed through his body like silent lightning. Uzzah dropped dead instantly beside the cart, in full view of 30,000 people who had been singing joyfully only seconds before. The music stopped abruptly. Tambourines fell silent in the dust, and a thick, almost physical silence swallowed the entire massive crowd at once. David, who had been dancing with unrestrained joy moments earlier, froze completely, staring at Uzzah's lifeless body lying beside the very ark he had wanted to honor. Scripture names that spot Perez Uzzah, the outbreak against Uzzah, a name that would remain forever etched into Israel's memory as a warning. The biblical text explains that God's anger burned because of Uzzah's error, a Hebrew expression implying serious wrongdoing, not a simple, innocent accident. Uzzah had treated the sacred as something ordinary, trusting his physical closeness to the ark, instead of fearing the holiness it truly represented. David felt a fear he had never known before, mixed with an anger he could not fully direct, toward God, toward himself, or toward death itself. The procession, meant to end in celebration, collapsed into panic. Nobody dared touch the ark again, or continue the journey toward Jerusalem that day. David asked aloud, in front of everyone present, how he could ever bring the ark of the Lord into his own city after witnessing this. That day, the most powerful king in Israel felt utterly small before a wooden chest covered in gold that no human army could ever control by force. He decided against bringing the ark to Jerusalem. Instead, he diverted it to the nearby house of a man named Obed-Edom, originally from Gath. Obed-Edom was not born an Israelite. He was a Levite of Gittite origin, perhaps less fearful, or perhaps simply willing to accept a risk others refused. The ark remained inside his home for 3 full months, a season of uncertainty in which no one in Israel knew what to do next. Contrary to everyone's fears, no disaster fell upon Obed-Edom's household. Instead, Scripture records that the Lord blessed his entire family abundantly. His fields flourished, his flocks multiplied, and rumors began spreading through Jerusalem that the ark brought no death to those who treated it with reverence. David heard these reports and understood something essential. The problem was never the ark itself, but the careless way men had chosen to move it. He summoned the priests and Levites, and this time he consulted the writings of Moses before giving a single order about transporting the ark again. The Levites, descendants of Kohath, received precise instructions. No one was to touch the ark directly. It must rest on their shoulders, carried by consecrated poles. David publicly admitted before the people that their first attempt had failed because we did not inquire of him about how to do it in the proper way. Sacrifices were prepared, priests were purified, and every 6 steps of the procession, an ox and a fattened calf were offered as an offering. David once again wore his linen ephod and danced again, but this time with a different kind of joy, tempered by hard-won, reverent fear. The second procession moved forward with deliberate slowness, every step handled with extreme care, nothing like the chaotic enthusiasm of the first improvised cart. When the ark finally crossed into Jerusalem, the entire population shouted with joy. But this time, that joy carried a newfound layer of respect. Michal, David's wife, watched the scene from a window and despised in her heart her husband's uninhibited dancing before the entire watching nation. But that is another story. Uzzah's story ends at the threshing floor of Nakon, forever marked by a name no one in Israel would forget. For centuries, rabbis and scholars would debate the severity of this punishment, wondering whether Uzzah deserved death for a gesture that seemed at first glance well-intentioned. Some ancient Jewish commentators suggest that living so close to the ark had gradually eroded the reverent fear every Israelite was meant to feel toward it. Others argue the real failure belonged not to Uzzah alone, but to David and the priests who allowed a cart instead of the prescribed sacred poles. Jewish tradition teaches that constant proximity to holiness without proper discipline can quietly become a danger that slowly erodes necessary respect over time. Uzzah represents anyone who, through excessive familiarity, forgets that certain things remain sacred regardless of how many times they were touched before, without consequence. His story also reveals something about God's nature. Holiness is not negotiable, and it does not bend to good human intentions that ignore clear instructions. The ark was never a magical object of superstition. According to Israel's faith, it was the very place where God's presence dwelled among mortal men. Touching it without proper ritual preparation meant, in the ancient world view, directly exposing oneself to a power no human being could ever contain or control. The Kohathite Levites carried those poles specifically to maintain a physical and symbolic distance between fragile humanity and something entirely, terrifyingly holy. That distance was never born from contempt toward people. It came from recognizing an essential difference between divine nature and human nature itself. Uzzah's death, viewed this way, was not an arbitrary punishment, but the inevitable consequence of ignoring a boundary meant to protect rather than to oppress anyone. Many modern readers, encountering this story for the first time, feel genuine outrage at what seems like a wildly disproportionate response to an innocent gesture. That human reaction is understandable, yet it also reveals how dramatically modern societies have changed their understanding of holiness and its boundaries. In the ancient world, holiness was never an abstract idea. It was treated as a real force, as dangerous to mishandle as fire or lightning. Priests purified themselves for days before approaching the ark. They washed, fasted, and followed strict rituals that Uzzah, in his haste, completely ignored that day. Nothing in the text suggests Uzzah acted with malice. His intention seemed genuinely noble, simply trying to keep the ark from crashing into the dust. Yet Scripture suggests that good intentions never replace precise obedience to what God had clearly established for his own chosen people to follow. This principle unsettled people then and continues unsettling readers now. Sincerity of heart is never enough when clear instructions exist and are deliberately ignored. David spent 3 long months processing this lesson. His initial fear slowly transformed into a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to serve a holy God. When he finally acted again, he did not repeat his mistake. He consulted Scripture, purified the priests, and arranged sacrifices along every stage of the journey. The second attempt succeeded not because God had changed, but because the people finally aligned themselves with what had always been required of them. This may be the hardest and most important lesson in the entire story. God does not adapt to human convenience, however joyful or well-meaning it appears. The threshing floor of Nacon, scene of that fatal stumble, became etched into Israel's collective memory as a permanent warning against careless irreverence. No ancient map marks its exact location today, but the name Perez Uzzah survived within sacred text as an unforgettable scar from that devastating day. Uzzah, whose name means strength in Hebrew, ended up remembered not for his strength, but for the fatal instant he reached towards something forbidden. His brother Ahio, who guided the cart from the front, survived that day, perhaps simply because he never physically touched the ark as Uzzah did. Abinadab's family, who had safely guarded the ark for 20 uneventful years, watched tragedy enter their bloodline in a single unbearable instant. It is easy to imagine the silence inside that house that night, grief mixing with confusion over a death so sudden and so publicly witnessed. 30,000 witnesses returned home, carrying a story they would repeat for generations, passing along the reverent fear Uzzah himself had forgotten to feel. The threshing floor of Nacon became, without anyone intending it, an open-air classroom where an entire nation learned a lesson no priest could teach with words alone. Meanwhile, Obed-Edom lived with the ark under his own roof, never certain whether he would wake to blessing or to a tragedy like Uzzah's. His quiet courage, or perhaps simple obedience, contrasted sharply with the careless improvisation that had defined the disastrous first attempt at moving the ark. When David finally witnessed the prosperity surrounding Obed-Edom's household, he understood that the ark itself was never dangerous, only demanding of proper, reverent handling. This distinction matters enormously for understanding the whole story. This was never about a capricious God, but about clear rules men chose to ignore for convenience. The new cart, a symbol of practical human innovation, turned out to be exactly the problem. Obedience had been quietly replaced by apparent efficiency. During the second procession, no cart existed at all. Levites carried the ark directly on their own shoulders, feeling the full weight of sacred responsibility. Every 6 steps, the sacrifice of an ox and a fattened calf reminded everyone present that this was no ordinary transport of religious furniture. David's dance before the ark, though later mocked by Michal, represented a joy purified by fear, entirely unlike the reckless excitement of the first attempt. Jerusalem finally received the ark not as a mere war trophy, but as the actual presence of God settling into the heart of the new capital. Uzzah's story remained forever tied to this triumph, a permanent reminder that true joy can never be separated from proper, deliberate reverence. Generations of later scribes and rabbis used this episode to teach that closeness to God demands preparation, humility, and obedience, not mere spontaneous enthusiasm. Uzzah's name, though tragic, survived within Scripture as an eternal warning. Familiarity with holy things must never collapse into careless disregard. His story, barely 2 verses long in the second book of Samuel, contains one of the most intense yet least discussed lessons in the entire Old Testament. Many modern Christians and Jews remain completely unaware of this episode, overshadowed by longer, more famous stories like David and Goliath or David and Bathsheba. Yet few biblical stories capture so directly the collision between sincere human intention and the strict demands of divine obedience. Uzzah was no villain, no declared blasphemer. He was perhaps the man who had lived closest to the ark of anyone alive, and that closeness destroyed him. His tragedy reminds us that prolonged proximity to something sacred without constantly renewing fear and respect can quietly become the deadliest kind of trap. Today, the threshing floor of Nacon no longer exists on any map, but the name Perez Uzzah remains written, warning every generation about lines never meant to be crossed. David learned, at a devastating cost that was not his own to pay, that ruling a kingdom also meant ruling his own careless irreverence. No crown, however glorious, exempted David from answering to a God who never negotiated his holiness for popular enthusiasm or good intentions. And so, one man's name, Uzzah, remained bound forever to the ark itself, a quiet reminder that no sincere heart ever replaces exact obedience. That day at the threshing floor of Nacon, the music stopped, but the echo of that lesson would resound for generations across all of Israel.